Hello, everyone. I think we are live now. Hello, everyone. We're live now. Happy to be here. Happy to be moderating the session of behavioral economics and economic decision making. We will have 4 presentations today. The presentations will go in order of Şahin presenting first, Şahin Bağırov, then followed by Emel Öztürk, and third one will be Leonie Gerhards, and then I will be presenting. First, I would like to introduce Şahin. Şahin is a last year PhD student at Koç University in Turkey. He has done his bachelor degree in Boğaziçi University in Turkey, after which he decided to do PhD at Koç University, master's and PhD at Koç University, and he's currently working with Ayşe Ebru Giritligil, who is a behavioral economist, and we all know her in the community by her name very well, one of the few behavioral economists working in Turkey. His topics are related to principal-agent relationships, and what he will present now will be one of his papers on principal-agent relationship and incentives. So I leave the floor to you, Şahin. Looking forward to hear your talk.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks. First of all, I want to thank for this wonderful workshop. I'm just trying to share my screen. Okay, I guess now it works. Okay, so before starting, I need to mention that this paper is half behavioral and experimental and half theoretical work. I will just try to mention experimental and behavioral part of this paper. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt during the presentation. So it is a co-work with Ayşe Giritligil, as Zahra also mentioned. Title of our paper is Gradualism in a Principal-Agent Interaction. So to have a quick start, we have a government, a principal, who hires a private firm, which corresponds to the agent in our setup, to implement a project with a lifespan of n years. So it is a repeated interaction. At the beginning of each year, the government, the principal, decides whether to continue with the firm or not. So this hiring decision is not one shot, it is not static, but it is made dynamically in the beginning of each period. If the firm, the agent, is rehired in a period, then it observes a state of world and chooses a project-related action. And at the end of each year, the principal observes both the firm's action and whether that action was appropriate for the project. Next, the principal, the government, makes hiring decision for the next year. So we have two types of agents, two types of firms. Agent may be good type, who shares same preferences with the principal, or a bad type, who always prefers a certain action. And that action may harm the principal. So the bad agent is very close to the classical definition of biased agent. Right? And we focus on the setup where the agent is bad with sufficiently high probability. So because that is where interesting results emerge. So inevitably we have reputation concerns in this setup. Why? Because we have asymmetric information. The principal does not know the agent's type. Principal only knows the probability of agent being good type. And there is a repeated play. Hence, it leads to reputation concerns. Reputation concern in our setup leads to bad agent to mimic the good agent, right? Because so that the bad agent can be hired in the future periods, right? We have instrumental reputation concern in this framework. And we add another layer here, and we change the relative allocation of stakes involved in the relationship. I will just elaborate on what is this relative allocation of stakes in just a minute. And we show that actually the extent of the magnitude of these reputation concerns depends on this relative allocation of stakes, relative allocation of weights for each period. So just to visualize what is different relative allocations of stakes. As you all know, in classical analysis of repeated interactions, each period receives same weight, right? Just ignoring a discounting factor, each period's weight is exactly the same, right? We do not change the weights of each period's decision. But here we change weights importance parameters, or what we call stakes of each period's decision. For example, in the above, you see starting small. It is what's called starting small. It corresponds to starting the interaction with small weights, with small stakes. So this it is illustration of 5 periods interaction, and this 5 different shades of red corresponds to different periods. As you can see, the first period receives 10% of all the weights. We normalize weights to add up to 1. And as you can see, we increase weights, the stakes, through time. When you look at the last period, 5th period, it receives 30% all the weights. Right? And on the other extreme, we have what's called starting large in the literature. We have 30% of all the weights in the first period. And as you go through the periods, weights, the importance, the stakes of each period decreases. Just to visualize what is going on here, so the first one is starting small, second one is starting large. So moving on, by changing these allocations of stakes, we try to answer the following questions, both theoretically and experimentally. And as I said, I will not get into the theoretical part in this presentation. So we ask, how do reputation concerns of the agents change with different allocations of stakes? Does the principal benefit from reputation concerns? This question is also important because in the literature there are a number of papers concluding that reputation concerns actually harm the players. So it is a bad thing. There are papers showing the benefits of reputation concerns, and we also try to answer that question. And our ultimate question is, which allocation gives the highest payoff to the principal? And as we define principal as, in a sense, a state official as government, then maximizing principal's payoff means maximizing social welfare. So just very quickly mention the previous literature, as our paper actually belongs to different strands of literature. There are classical works on repeated interaction, theoretical works. There are a bunch of theoretical works on starting small. As I said, they analyze different environments, different games, and they show that in a repeated interaction, if you start with small steps, if you start with small stakes and increase stakes through time, then players benefit from it. Equilibrium behavior is improved, equilibrium payoffs is improved, cooperation increases, coordination increases, etc. And there are experimental works on these repeated interactions. There are experimental analysis of starting small. Again, experimentally starting small is analyzed in different environments. They showed that if you start the interaction small, cooperation increases, coordination increases. They analyzed starting small in a trust game, and they showed that starting small increases standard payoff, etc. And I just want to mention one particular set of papers by Andrean and Samuelson and Andrean et al. They analyzed twice-repeated prisoner's dilemma game experimentally. And they change relative allocation of stakes between these two periods, as we do. And they conclude that the payoffs and cooperation increases is maximized when you start the interaction small. More precisely, they show that payoffs and cooperation is maximized when first period receives 1/3 of all the stakes and second period receives 2/3. Right? And the way that we define allocation of stakes and we define starting small is very small to that of Andreon and Samuelson, and that's why I wanted to mention that set of papers. So to moving on our experimental design, we fix Andrew 3. So there is 3 periods interaction. We have 4 treatments based on different allocations of stakes, and you can see a visualization of these 4 different treatments. We have one equal stakes treatment. It's our treatment 1. As you can see, each period receives exactly the same stake. And we have 3 different starting small treatments. You may ask that why you need to have 3 different starting small treatments, because I will mention we have behavioral hypotheses on the effect of different allocation of stakes on behaviors of both agent and principal, and that's why we needed them. These treatment numbers actually corresponds to speed of increase of the relative stakes. For example, in treatment 2, we increase stakes by multiplying by 2. In treatment 3, we increase by multiplying by 3. These are rounded up numbers, of course. They are increasing by multiplying by 3. And treatment 4, we increase stakes by multiplying by 4. And we normalize them to add up to 1. So these are our 4 different treatments. These are our treatment parameters. I don't want to spend time on this, but again, if you have any question, we can come back here just to say that these are allocation of stakes, as you can see. If you compare these 2 extremes, treatment 4 and treatment 1, you can see that there is huge difference in how stakes are allocated. Right? So moving on, we have 20 participants in each session, 10 principals, 10 agents, and 10% of the agents is good type in each session. Right? So as you recall, I said that we focus on the setup where there is very small probability of agent being good type. We have 15 super games. The super game is basically this 3-period game, as I said. And each is played with a new opponent. We have a stranger matching, and the subject's reputation is not passed to the new games. So there is no history between games. And we choose 2 of these 15 super games randomly, and the payments from these two games are paid to avoid endowment effect. And we use neutral labels for agent types because, as you know, good and bad types are loaded. We cannot use that words. In the experiments, we use type 1 and type 2. And timing of our each super game is as follows. So when the subjects are matched, we ask the principal about his belief on the probability of agent being good type. And then principal decides whether to hire the agent. If agent is not hired, relationship ends. If agent is hired, we use colors in the experiment for states and actions. Computer chooses a color, green or blue, with equal probability. Agent observes computer's choice of color, and agent also chooses a color, green or blue. Then principal observes both computers and agent's choice, and unless it is the 3rd period, super game proceeds to the next period, and first 5 steps are repeated. And this is how we define the payoffs. We fix k to 1/3 in the experiment, but our results hold for any k between 0 and 1/2. So, as I said, both good agent and the principal prefer the action to match the state of work. So they prefer the agent to choose the same color with the computer. When that holds, both good agent and the principal get a payoff of k. They get a positive payoff. Otherwise, they get a negative payoff. And when it comes to bad agent always prefers color blue. As you can see, it does not depend on the computer's choice. In the stage game, if the agent and the principal plays a one-shot interaction so that it is not a repeated game, they only play this game for once, then bad agent will always choose color blue, irrespective of the computer's choice. So that is how we define the payoffs, and outside option is 0. If agent is not asked, he gets 0 payoff. So we have 4 modules, just to briefly mention. We start with incentivized quiz to see whether the subjects understood the assignment, they understood the instructions of the experiment. Then we have main body of 15 super games. We have incentivized whole glory task to measure risk preferences of the subjects. And we have surveys. We conducted experiments via O3 online at the virtual lab of Belize with undergraduate students from various departments of Istanbul Bilgi University. Each experiment session lasted approximately 100 minutes, and subjects received on average 52 Turkish liras at that time. So, as I said, we have theoretical model in the background, and that model predicted this allocation to be optimal for the principal. As you recall, we fixed k to 1/3 for the experiments. So it means the optimal allocation for the principal is to start small and increase stakes by multiplying by 3. And it corresponds to our treatment 3. And the equilibrium behavior of the agents is as follows. So good agent always plays the color that matches the computer's choice. Bad agent always choose blue when computer chooses blue. But bad agent plays green with a positive probability when the state of work is green in the first 2 periods. And this we use nu I 0 for measuring this probability. Probability of bad agent playing green when computer chooses green. Hence, we say that we can measure reputation incentives with the frequency of bad agent choosing green when computer chooses green. All right. So our first prediction about agents' behavior is that as there is no reputational incentive in the last period is basically the 1 period interaction. There is no feature, hence bad agent should not have reputation concerns, and bad agent should play blue in any treatment, irrespective of the computer's choice. And actually, that is what we observe. Both agents play stage game maximizing actions in the last period. Hence, we conclude that in the first periods, if we observe bad agent playing green, then it must be due to reputation concerns, because then it means that bad agent wants to mimic the good agent, hence plays green. And our second prediction is that smaller the interaction starts, more reputational investment is. All right? So if interaction starts small, it means that there are higher stakes in the future. And it means that the agent can potentially earn higher payoffs in the future. Then the agent will have higher reputation concerns. Right? And actually, we observe this. So the first column is population frequencies of bad agent playing green when computer chooses green. As you can see, it is very low in treatment 1 in equal stakes. It is about 10%. But when you go through the starting small interactions, looking at the other extreme in treatment 4, you can see that at 80% of instances where computer chooses green, bad agent also chooses green. And we also have results of logit regression here, and we can conclude that this prediction is satisfied. Actually, we measure these reputation concerns, and they depend on the allocation of stakes. About the beliefs, as I said, we asked the principal about his belief on the agent's type. In the first period, 85% of the principals reported 10% belief, and mean belief is 30%. Of course, the objective probability is 10%, as you recall. There is 10% probability of agent being good type. And actually, that is fairly close to objective probability. In experiments, we always expect there to be homemade priors, homemade beliefs, or some subjects may feel lucky. They may say that, okay, I know that there is 10% probability of this guy being good type, but I feel myself lucky, hence I will report 15%. Hence, we say that it is fairly close, it is fair, And we have another prediction about principal's belief. We expect principal's belief to be highest after observing both computer and agent choosing green. And we expect it to be lowest after observing computer choosing green and agent choosing blue. As you recall, good agent has no motivation to choose blue when computer chooses green. Hence, it is intuitive to expect that. We also have predictions for middle levels and results, but I just skip this for the sake of time. And our regression results also justifies this prediction. We show that this prediction is supported. Principal's reported beliefs is highest after observing green, and lowest when computer chooses green and agent chooses blue. And it is visualization of change in beliefs, actually. It is basically delta belief in second period and belief in first period. All right. And as you can see, this is zeros and ones are colors. This 0 is green and 1 is blue. When computer chooses green and agent chooses blue, as you can see, agent's median belief decreases, it is negative. And on the other extreme, where both computer and the agent chooses green, then agent's reputation, in a sense, the principal's belief on agent's type increases. Right? Another prediction, as we expect principal to be a rational player, if he reports the highest belief after green, then he should hire the agent most after this observation. Right? So we expect hiring to be most frequent after green, and least frequent after green, blue. And actually, that is also satisfied as our logistic regression results show. As you can see, agent is hired mostly after this observation, green. And lastly, the ultimate hypothesis, ultimate prediction was regarding the payoffs. We expected the principal to get the highest payoff in treatment 3, followed by other two starting small treatments, and equal stakes treatment. And our observation is that although the ranking among these 3 starting small treatments is not statistically significant, we show that all starting small treatments lead to a higher payoff compared to the equal stakes treatment. We run simulations and we run rank sum test here. We have 2 simulations. I will just be quick here. We have general simulation in which we gather all the strategies, so there is no restriction at all. And the first row shows result of that. As you can see, 2 starting small treatments lead to higher payoff compared to equal stakes. And just skipping that, we run weakly simulation on weakly risk neutral subjects. We define weakly risk neutral as if the subject is not strictly risk averse or risk lower, than he's weakly risk neutral. How we implement that? We just drop the subjects who reported self-riskiness on the extremes or whose switching point in whole task is at extremes. Then we see that all 3 starting small treatments lead to higher payoff compared to equal stakes, and all are statistically significant and actual significance increased. Right? So to quickly wrap up, our first and most challenging thing when we started this work was to how will we measure repetition incentives in the controlled experiment. And we showed that it is actually measured through controlled experiments, and actual repetition incentives depend on relative stakes. I will just skip this. And also principles, beliefs, and behavior confirm theoretical predictions. And starting the interaction, small is shown to improve principal's payoff, because as principal is cautious about the agent, as you recall, there is high probability that agent is bad type. Starting with small stakes means lower risk, right? And as you start small and gradually increase the stakes, you discipline, in a sense, the bad agent to choose the same color as the computer. As you recall, from time to time, bad agent chooses green when computer chooses green. And it is very close, what's called discipline effect by Morris. Lastly, as principal can observe the agent and update his beliefs about the agent through time, and in the future periods there are higher stakes, then principal will have more information on the agent in the future periods. And it is very close to what's called sorting effect of reputation incentives by Morris. Thank you. I hope I made it at time.
Thank you. Yes, perfect at time. We even have 1 or 2 minutes for questions.
Great.
Any questions from audience or from the other speakers? If not, I will ask question, and if you guys have questions also, let me know. So you say starting small has better outcomes for the principal. So if you carry it to real world setting, how would that actually can you give us an example where this policy is as a policy or as a organizational decision making? How could this show itself?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it has a wide range of real world applications. If we continue with this government official example, let's say you have a government official and you hire a private firm to implement the project, but you are not sure about the preferences of that private firm. That firm may be biased, that firm may have other incentives. Then you do not give the job of highest importance the first to the firm, right? You start with small importance jobs. And through time, as that firm proves itself as valuable, as good type, or you update your belief about the firm as as being good type, then through time, you increase the importance of jobs you allocate to the firm, right? So that is just one example, or in any daily interaction, even in romantic relations, right? So if you meet with someone, you start with small steps, and through time you increase the size of steps. And actually that is very intuitive, so that is not a novelty that we are showing here, but we are showing here that okay, we expected that to be the best, but also we observed that behavioral patterns through time, and we also observed other benefits of that. As you are trying the other party, also you are disciplining the other party to do the right thing through time, right? Because otherwise, for example, in our setup, the bad agent would never do the right thing. But now, bad agent does the right thing from time to time just to increase her reputation, let's say. But I am benefiting from that actually. That increases my expected payoff. So that is a wrap up, I can say.
Any other question? One very fast question I'm going to ask. When you say do the right thing, and as I remember in your payoff table, it was bad agent. If it chooses green, he will get K -1, and K is 1/3. So he's getting actual negative, something negative.
Exactly.
Is there a reason why you chose negative thing? So he's actually hurting himself.
Exactly. It is because there is a trade-off, and the bad agent does the right thing by hurting himself. Right? It is costly reputation building, but actually they are doing it just so that, because there are more important payoffs to be earned in the future. So okay, I am willing to give up that payoff so that I can earn more in the future. Actually, as I said, we can also talk about this instrumental reputation building. This reputation building is instrumental. The subject strategically, rationally uses that, because so that he can benefit in the future. But at the same time, principal also benefits that. That is the catch here.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Okay, thank
Şahin,
you.
for this very nice talk. And now we will continue with Emel. Just to introduce Emel very briefly. Emel did her bachelor in Istanbul Bilgi University, then she did her master's at Bilkent University, after which she moved to Netherlands to do her doctoral degree in Maastricht University. You Currently, she works at Tilburg, and she works on topics of fairness, discrimination, inequality, and what she will present today is also on these topics, and we are looking forward to hear you talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Zahra. Indeed, let me share my screen. Yes. Okay. You can see my slides, I guess. Yeah, okay. All right, so I will start. Hey, hi everyone. I'm indeed Emel Öztürk. I'm really happy to join this session. Hopefully you will find what I'm going to present interesting. So this is joint work with Zahra, who is here from the University of Portsmouth in the UK. Me, myself, Yi, Şahin, and Sigrid students. All of us, so Yi, myself, and Sigrid are at Tilburg University in the Department of Economics. What I'll present today is a bit different because I'll actually report results from 3 different experiments. And because they're also quite different from each other with some common features, of course, I'll focus on the common features and what this paper is about. It's work in progress. So what I will talk about is kind of the first half of this project, basically. Here's the title, the effect of ethnic salience on behavior towards ethnic minorities. What do I mean by that? Let me quickly jump in. So this starts with an experiment that was actually run in the Netherlands with list panelists. This is a long time running panel study of I think up to like 5,000 participants. Of course, not all of them joined this experiment. The survey runs every month with the participants, and researchers like us can actually put in modules to these surveys. You can create your own surveys or even run your experiments with the participants. This is what happened for us in July of 2020. So quickly, let me tell you about what that experiment included. We had a native Dutch decision maker who had to decide how to allocate a given amount of money between herself and another recipient. We had 2 treatments, majority and minority, where in the first one, the recipient was also a native Dutch person, while in the second term, in the minority treatment, the recipient was a second-generation immigrant with either a Turkish or a Moroccan background. To, of course, give this information of ethnic background, in this way, the participants, the native Dutch decision makers, were shown the first name and the parents' birthplace of the recipient. So that is how they actually conveyed this ethnic information. What we found was positive ethnic discrimination. As you might notice, I'm not going into the details of the experiment because I have to talk about 3 experiments, but at this stage, for my purposes, I guess it's enough to say that there was an allocation of money between a decision maker and the recipient, and we found positive ethnic discrimination. Of course, when you look at the design, one thing that would immediately come to place is that giving the first name and the birthplace of the parents might have made the goal, the research purpose, very obvious. And the ethnic background perhaps was too salient, and that affected behavior in a specific way. Well, what if? So this was kind of our interpretation of the result, right? And this also we can also relate this interpretation to the literature. For example, in the second bullet point, you see that a study by Barr and co-authors in 2018 found that when you have identities in a lab setting, natural identities versus artificially induced identities like in blue colors or green colors, in the first one, there was less discrimination because people thought it was more socially inappropriate. So when ethnic information, for example, is given, discrimination is considered less appropriate than if the identity was artificially induced. We also, when we look at our results, we also see that sensitivity to social desirability bias, I'll explain what I mean by this in a second, is actually significantly and positively correlated with prosociality towards minorities, but not majorities. You can see the p-values here. And the social desirability bias is actually measured in the list panel every year with a 10-item survey. This is based on already a survey in psychology, a validated Marlowe-Krohn survey. And typically, the questions here are like this. You are given a statement, for example, I have never intensely disliked anyone, and the participant has to choose true or false. But the statements are often too good to be true. For example, to this statement, if you say true, it is likely not really the truth, right? That you have never intensely disliked anyone. So the statements are like this, too good to be true. And that's how the social desirability bias is measured. Basically, we count the number of times that a participant gives the socially desirable, but likely not true answer. And then we look at median split, for example. Those above median social desirability bias seem to be changing their behavior when ethnicity is more salient towards minorities. But with the majority treatments, nothing changes. So social desirability bias doesn't have an impact there. I'll come back to the social desirability bias towards the end of my talk. But okay, so far we say that ethnic salience might have affected the behavior towards the minorities. That might be why we saw positive discrimination. Of course, to test for that, you can quickly design a new wave where the salience is lower. So to address this question, was it this ethnic salience that caused that actually drive our observation that of a positive discrimination? We ran a new wave with the same panel, but this time without information about the parents' birthplace, because it's likely that giving the birthplace of parents comes out of the blue in the experiment and really makes ethnicity of the other recipient very salient. So if we compare this, of course, you need to ask, did it really increase the awareness of the research purpose when we changed the design? So if we look at that, we asked the participants, what do you think the purpose of the current survey is? And they could choose either social preferences, so it was about measuring social preferences, or that it was about ethnicity, behavior towards different ethnicities. If you look at the low and the high conditions, low condition is the the December wave, where we didn't give information about parents' birthplace, and high condition is high ethnic salience condition, where the parents' birthplace is given as part of the information to the decision maker. You see that if you compare what I have highlighted in blue here, the percentage of participants who said it had to do something with ethnicity was much lower in the low case than in the high case. So this suggests that indeed in the high wave, more participants were able to tell what the experiment was about, right? The ethnicity was very salient, and that might have been the reason of the positive discrimination that we observed. Let's see if actually we said there was positive discrimination, but did the behavior change between the high and the low treatments? What I have in this table is, as the dependent variable, we have the income share of the recipient. Remember, in this experiment, there is a native Dutch decision maker who allocates money between herself and the recipient. This is the income share in percentages as of the recipient. And high is the the July wave, where ethnic salience was higher. You can see that there's a significant difference between the income shares of the minority recipients, this is for minority recipients, in the two waves, between the two waves. However, when I change it to the majority, when we look at behavior towards majority, nothing changes between the two treatments. So ethnic salience, these findings suggest that ethnic salience actually changes behavior towards the minority. Okay, this is a balancing table. Perhaps I don't need to talk about it. This just shows that the sample was balanced. The sample was balanced between the two treatments. Okay, so we have one experiment that suggests that ethnic salience might change behavior towards minorities and actually can cause positive, more pro-social behavior. I will also report results from two related experiments, all of which suggest the same finding. One of them was an experiment in the UK, ran in 2019 and 2020 in Prolific online, in the online platform. And another one was ran in the Netherlands in 2014 and 2015. The one in the Netherlands was also run in the same panel, with the same list panel, of course, with different participants. It is hard to explain all three of them in detail due to time constraints, but what matters for us is that they have some key common features. In all three experiments, the one I just reported the results of, the UK one and the earlier Dutch one, there is a native majority decision maker. This decision maker makes decisions about the earnings between a minority participant and a majority participant. In some cases, the majority participant is the decision maker herself. Actually, this is the case in the Dutch experiments. Or the majority participant is a third participant. That was the case in the UK way. And in all three experiments, we have two conditions that differ in the extent, in the amount of ethnic salience. However, how the salience differs is actually different as well. In the first one I just presented, the ethnic salience was changed by the experimenters, basically by changing the information we give to the decision makers. However, for the earlier Dutch experiment and UK experiment, the ethnic salience changed due to external events. If you look at the left-hand side, where I have Charlie Hebdo with the orange bars, so what this is the first one, the first orange bar, where you see low in parentheses, is actually when the first wave of the earlier Dutch experiment was run. And the second wave was run in the second orange bar, you can see. And in between these things, we unfortunately had this shootings on the Charlie Hebdo in France. And the little bars show Google search trends. You can see that around that time, words related to topics on racism, immigration, Muslims, these kind of words, this is the number of times these kind of words were searched in the UK and the Netherlands and the whole trend. You can see a sharp increase in the search of these terms. So what this says is that, yes, we have two conditions, but this time the low condition is before the shootings, before Charlie Hebdo, and the high condition is after. Of course, it wasn't something that was actually manipulated by the experimenters, but about more due to an external event. And the Google search trends do show that indeed ethnicity and immigration, these kind of topics, or racism, were actually quite popular, or were really in the agenda of people, were being searched a lot. If we look at the UK experiment, before that, the UK experiment, we see now on the right-hand side, where I have Black Lives Matter, you see that the low conditions of the UK experiment were actually run before the Black Lives Matter movement started in the US in the summer of 2020. As you might all remember, this was also a pretty big event where it was quite popular in the news everywhere around the world, not just in the US. And our high, in the UK experiment, our high condition was actually run quickly after the Black Lives Matter movement started. So the ethnicity salience, and here we show the Dutch experiment that I already discussed, you can see that the high condition was also actually pretty close to the Black Lives Matter. So you can say the high condition, the high ethnic salience comes from the design, but also probably from being so close to the BLM movement. This table gives an overview of the experiments, how the ethnicity was signaled, and what was the trigger of ethnic salience. This kind of summary of what I've already said. I think for time purposes, I can skip this one. But in all of them, that's the most important thing, the decision maker was a native Dutch or British participant, and the recipient was a minority or a majority participant. Okay, if you put all of our results together, what I have in this table is, again, the dependent variable is the standardized income share of the recipient in all three experiments. And I also divided it by minority and majority treatments. In the first three rows, you see high, again, this refers to the condition. You see that in all three experiments, in the high condition, the minority participant recipient was actually treated more positively in the high condition than in the low condition. So prosociality towards minorities increased. And you see that all three were significant at the 1% level. However, in the majority treatments, in all three experiments, we don't see this. So the high condition did not have an impact on behavior towards the minority recipient in the majority, towards the majority recipient, but it did affect behavior towards the minority recipient. Now, we have these three findings at hand. They all suggest that ethnic salience, a trigger of ethnic salience, can change behavior towards minorities and actually can increase prosociality. What we want to do next is, of course, what we need to ask next is why? What is the mechanism that drives these results? So far, for this talk, I only put this much, but I can tell you what we want to do next or what we're doing next. We have three potential mechanisms in mind that we think we can test with the data we have. One of them was social desirability bias that I already kind of briefly mentioned in my introduction. It seems indeed that people who are more prone to social desirability bias are also the ones who change their behavior in the high condition towards the minorities. But we also have two other mechanisms that we want to test, and that's what we will do next, basically. We will try to dig deeper into this and try to see what it is that drives people to change their behavior towards minorities when ethnic salience is higher. That's, for me, all.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any questions? Audience,
yes.
from others?
if I may.
Sure.
Yeah, very interesting project. I wondered if the effects might come from the subject pools you used. Are those people who participate in these type of experiments or the surveys, are they somehow different to the normal population, the general population of those countries, the Netherlands and the UK? Can you say something about that? And also within the sample, do you find like heterogeneity, that some people are discriminating against and others are discriminating in favor of the minorities?
Yes, of course. Well, in all three, we, in the list panel, in the Dutch one, the list panel is a representative sample of the Netherlands. So yes, they are actually quite representative of the general Dutch population. In the UK one, as you know, in Prolific, of course, you kind of try to get your participants, but there too, we actually, it was also representative in terms of, I think, age and gender. So we also, I don't think it's really the sample that derives our results for the first one. For the second one, there is heterogeneity in also both before and after, but in general, of course, with the social desirability bias, especially, there's a lot of heterogeneity. But overall, we see that in the high conditions, most people went towards a more positive, more prosocial behavior than others. But that is the question, who is it? Who are the people that are actually making this change, who are doing this? So that's hard, but there's some heterogeneity, yes. There's, of course, some difference.
Great. We will move on, if you don't mind, as we are strapped on time. Şahin, you had
Can I ask just a very fast question?
Sure.
So it is a very interesting topic. So I will just ask. So you are controlling for whether you provide information about parental birthplace, right? That is high condition. But did you check the what that information was? So I was wondering, it may have effect whether the parent was born in, let's say, for speaking about this UK experiment, whether that parent was born in UK or in Turkey. I guess that would have effect on this discrimination behavior. For example, I may guess that there will be more positive discrimination when you see that parent was born in UK, let's say. So did you check for that? Because that, I guess that would be interesting.
Yes, so I should have actually mentioned that the birthplace of the parents was given only in the latest, this Emel Dutch 2020 experiments. And in the low and high condition, we change in the design changes. In the high condition, you give birthplace information, in the low condition, not. But the recipient, so in this case, the recipient would be either minority, which would mean that their parents' birthplace would be either Turkey or Morocco, or a majority Dutch person, which would mean their parents was born in the Netherlands. So that was the information conveyed. So indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you define minority as the first generation to be born in that country, right?
Yes, indeed, they were second generation immigrants. So indeed, their parents would have been born in Turkey or Morocco, but they themselves would have been born in the Netherlands.
Okay, I see.
Yes. So, but in the UK experiment and the earlier Dutch experiment, the 2014-15, the design of the experiment was actually the same in the conditions, in the different conditions. But the conditions, the high and low conditions, come from the external events, the shootings and on Charlie Hebdo, the Charlie Hebdo event, and the Black Lives Matter.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Leonie, floor is yours. Sorry, I'll just introduce Leonie very briefly. Leonie did her bachelor degree in Bonn, and then she did her doctoral degree at the University of, I forgot now, sorry.
Frankfurt?
Frankfurt, yes, of course, at the University of Frankfurt, after which she worked as a postdoctoral researcher at Hamburg, and now she is a lecturer at the King's College London in the UK. She works on various topics actually, but I would say your main research topic is incentives, on how principal-agent relationship at work holds, and also on gender, some work on gender as well, gender differences. And today you'll present something about fines and compensations. So floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the kind introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen. Take a while. So. Is it there yet? Yeah. Okay. So today I'm going to present the work with this a joint project with two people from the law department at the University of Rotterdam, and we do compare different sanction regimes. So we want to see if compensation regimes or fine regimes are better in deterring wrongdoing and installing trust in the society. Let's see. So in many areas, such as competition law, consumer law, or environmental law, we see that policymakers choose between alternative forms of sanctions. So most prominently, they choose between fine payment schemes or compensation schemes. So when you did something wrong and you go to court and you're fined, your sanctions, you either have to pay a fine or you have to compensate the victim. And one could say that in general, the European Union countries are generally more tuned towards compensation schemes, whereas the US-American approach would be to use fine schemes to deter future perpetrators from wrongdoing. But yeah, basically these schemes have just been put in place without knowing much about the relative effects. And we today talk about the effects on the potential infringers, and also the society in general, the potential victims. And yeah, we study these effects in a controlled environment because only a lab experiment can allow us to observe every type of wrongdoing, and like everyone is under consideration here. So we do not have to wait for cases to come to court, but in the lab we actually see who's behaving and who's misbehaving. So our research questions in general. So from the infringers or the deterrence point of view, so we first want to see, are there any general deterrence differences? So are there different effects of fine payment schemes versus compensation schemes in the effect to generally deter wrongdoing? So what are the incentive effects in economic terms? And which type of the sanction is better in deterring wrongdoing or misbehavior? Then we want to focus on those who have those infringers who have been caught before, so who learn better from having to pay a fine or from having to pay a compensation to the victim, who is then not misbehaving anymore afterwards. And the third question we want to answer is, are there any lasting effects? So if we remove those sanction schemes, we'll see potential perpetrators still behave well and not misbehave. And are these lasting effects more pronounced in the fine schemes or in the compensation schemes world that we consider here? And then we also want to see how do these schemes affect the society? So not the perpetrators, but the potential victims. Yeah, so similar to the other slide, we focus on the general trust. So which type of sanction is more successful in maintaining the potential victims' trust? Under which of these sanction schemes they do trust more another person? Then the second question to be would be, after they met an infringer who has misbehaved and had been punished, can we restore their trust? And which of these sanction schemes is better in restoring trust or in maintaining the victim's trust? And the third question again is on the lasting effects. So in the last part of the experiment, we are going to consider a world where the sanctions will be removed after a period where there were different kind of sanction schemes in place. So do we observe any long-lasting effects on trust then in this situation? So let me jump into the experimental design. We implement 3 treatments. So we have a benchmark treatment, which we just call the no sanction treatment. So there's just no sanctions in place. And compare this benchmark treatment to the fine treatment, where a sanction infringer has to pay a fine, which basically goes back to us experimenters. So it's not paid to anyone, but just money that is taken from the infringer and goes back to us. And in the compensation treatment, on the other hand, the sanctioned infringers have to compensate the victim for his or her loss. And it will be the same type of payment or the same amount to be paid, but here in the fine treatment, it just goes back to the experimenters, whereas in the compensation treatment, it goes to the victim to compensate for the loss. The game is as follows. So we have 2 players, player 1 and player 2. Player 1 is perfectly informed about the state of the world, which can be either state X or state Y, and both are implemented with 50% probability. So player 1 observes the state of the world, player 2 does not. But our player 1 can send a message to player 2 about the state of the world. And this could be either a truthful message or it could be a lie. And the misbehavior we observe in our experiment is lying about the state of the world. So in state X, let me walk you through this. Maybe let's do it like that. So player 1 can choose between A and B, and player 2 can choose between the actions C and D. And the strictly dominant action in the state of the world X is that both that player 1 chooses A and player 2 chooses C. Yeah? So this is the strictly dominant action in state X for our two players, 1 and 2. So both want this to be implemented. In state Y, on the other hand, player 1 will still always prefer to choose B compared to action A. But player 2 really likes, wants to play D, and is, instead of choosing C, is stealing kind of money from player 1. So in state Y, as it's said here, player 1 choosing B and player 2 chooses C would yield a higher payoff to player 1. So our player 1, who knows the state of the world, has an incentive to lie. So he tells player 2, look, state X is currently happening, so that player 2 believes, oh, I should play C then, and that's how they end up at this, these payoffs. Yeah, so only in state Y, our player 1 has an incentive to lie, not in state X. So how does the experiment goes then? So in the first step, our player 1 is informed about the state of the world. Then he informs the other player and either say, I saw an X or I saw an Y. So it's not a chat, it's just a box they tick, which sends a message to player 2. Then these players simultaneously choose their actions. So choose between A and B or C and D. And then afterwards, they receive information about the actual state of the world. So every player 2 knows then if he or she has been lied to or not. And they also see which actions had been chosen and which payoffs go to player 1 and 2. So, and then, this is this fourth step is where we implement the treatment, because in no sanction treatment, there's no further information provided. Whereas in the fine and compensation treatment, always 1/3 of the player 1s are checked if they reported truthfully or not. And if they were caught lying, then a player 1 would have to pay a fine of 10 points, which is then just subtracted from the payoff. Whereas in the compensation treatment, if a player 1 has been caught lying, he would have to transfer 10 points to player 2, to the victim. So that is, kind of in part 1 of the experiment. It's only these 4 steps with these 3 treatments that we implemented here. In part 2 of the experiment, we inform all participants that they are going to repeat the game from part 1 4 more times. But not in the same matching, but the player 1s and player 2s will be randomly rematched in a matching group. So we wanted to allow for learning, but not for reputation building. That's why we chose this type of setup. And the last part of the experiment is then where we remove all the sanction schemes. So all subjects, no matter what treatment they were taking decisions under before, they now play an additional round of no sanction. So again, with a randomly selected new matching partner. And this allows us then to observe if there are any spillover effects, if they learn from the sanction scheme, to still not lie, even if the sanction schemes are removed. Okay, so the purpose of our first part of the experiment is then to answer the questions on the general deterrence effects and the general trust effects in the cleanest way possible. Yeah, it's a simple one-shot game. In part 2, we can then go on and observe if there's any specific deterrence effect. So we can observe how do potential infringers behave after they had been caught lying before. Do they stop lying after they had to pay a fine, or do they even more often stop lying after they had to pay a compensation to the victim? And from the victim's point of view, our part 2, the repeated decision making, we can observe if trust can be restored after a victim has experienced the law, has observed that perpetrators are caught and sanctioned for wrongdoing. And then again, our last part 3, where we remove the sanction schemes, allows us to observe if potential victims learn from having experienced the compensation and the fine regimes in the past. To see if they still trust others if sanctions are removed. So we chose a between subject design. So we ran 4 sessions in the no sanction treatment and 6 sessions each in fine and compensation treatments. In each session we had 24 subjects, 12 of them player 1s, 12 of them player 2s. We used the perfect stranger matching. And the gender ratio was almost balanced. Out of these 6 rounds in which they had to take decisions, we select one randomly to pay them, and they knew that from the beginning of the experiment. Each session lasted about 60 minutes, and average payment was 11.50 euros. Okay, if there are no questions about the design, I come to the results now quickly. Okay. So what do we look at? We want to observe if player 1s lie. So that means, again, in our little game, there's no incentive to lie in state X because incentives are aligned here. Player A and B, they want to choose these outcomes, kind of. We observe lying only in state Y. So when player 2 says, look, we are in state X, to make player 1 choose action A, that is what we consider a lie. That's relatively easy and straightforward. Trusting, trusting means player 2 chooses C whenever player 1 reports state X. So if player 2 believed that player 1 was lying to him in some occasions when state X is reported, we should not observe more than 50% choosing C after having been reported state X. This is how we identify trust on the player 2's side. And then player 1 successfully lied if he made player 2 choose C after reporting state X when actually state Y prevailed. So these are the terms that we are going to use now to look at behavior. So the first thing we wanted to ensure is that our participants understood the experimental instructions. Did they understand the game? And if we look at these decisions in the 6 periods, we see that actually if we have state X, then 99.3% of player 1s actually report they are in state X. So that makes sense. They understood they should not lie about state X. And they also took the right decision. In line with that reporting state X prevails, they chose A. So that's good. And then yeah, again, almost 100% of player ones also understood that the best thing they can do is choose B in state Y. So yeah, we're quite certain our player ones understood the game. And considering player twos, what do they choose after they receive message Y, which will never be a lie, as we said. We see again almost all of them chose strategy D in that case. Yeah, we're not sure if those remaining 7% of players did not understand the game, or if they wanted to reward their player ones for telling the truth. So that's both could be true. Okay, but now let's come to the actual results. So if we focus on part one, this one-shot game, we find most misbehavior in the no sanction treatment. So the only significant differences here are that between fine and no sanction treatment, and between the compensation and the no sanction treatment. So the deterrence effect of the fine and the compensation treatment are not significantly different. Yeah, both are equally able to deter infringers from lying here. And yeah, this kind of is repeated in part two. So there again, we observe the most cases of misbehavior in the no sanction treatment. But here we also observe that the second rank of misbehavior is in the compensation treatment, and we observe the lowest levels of misbehavior in the fine treatment. So we ran some additional regressions to find out about the specific deterrence effects here as well. So let me guide you through this table. In the first column, so the dependent variable is always player one's decision to lie in part two. So we only consider those periods in which they observed the state as Y, and then we observe if they report an X or a Y. And as I said, yeah, so we observe least or less lying in the fine treatment and in the compensation treatment. And the treatment difference between fine and compensation is significant as well. So really least lying is observed in the fine treatment. Then we add some controls, whether the player has lied before, and if a previous lie was successful. And we see the treatment effects still survive, but yeah, if the player has lied before, he just is more likely to continue lying afterwards. We add some further controls in the third column, so nothing interesting changes here. And then we want to see, are there these specific deterrence effects? So if a player has been caught lying before, is that going to make that person lying less afterwards? Not really. And also, having been checked for lying before in one of the previous rounds does not change behavior. So it's rather the treatment effect is driving the results. If you are deterred from lying because you know there could be a fine payment, or because you know there could be a compensation treatment, that changes your behavior from the beginning, and then you just stick to that behavior. It's not that after you've been caught or checked for lying, that does not really affect your future behavior. Okay, so from the victim's point of view, did that spill over? Do they believe in messages sent in the fine treatment more often than in the compensation treatment or the no sanction treatment? Yeah, in part one, we don't really observe that. So these treatment differences are really marginal. Yeah, it looks like they do trust less in the no sanction treatment, but it's just not really significant. In the long run, so in part two, where they take their decisions 4 more times, we actually find that trust is larger in the fine treatment compared to the no sanction treatment. Yeah, so again, we run further regressions, and we find that this difference in trust between the fine and the no sanction treatment is driven by the fact that in fine, you just meet fewer liars. Yeah? Player twos are just, not so often lied to as in the other experiment, in the other treatment. And we also observe that having been lied to, so having met one of the liars, decreases your trust in the future. Whereas then having experienced the law, having experienced that the liar has been caught, or any of the player ones that you've been matched to has been checked, that has no significant effect on trust. So apparently 4 rounds are not enough to establish trust in our experimental society. Here are the regressions. It's really, if you have matched a player 1 that lied to you in the past, this is going to decrease your trust. This is going to decrease your probability to choose C in this part 2. And as I said, so having been matched to a player who was caught lying or who was checked for lying has no specific effect on increasing your trust afterwards. Okay, let's have a quick look at the lasting effect. So if we check behavior in part 3 of the experiment, where the sanction schemes had been removed, we find actually some lasting deterrence effect of both the fine treatments and the compensation treatments. So both are similarly effective in reducing misbehavior compared to the no sanction treatment. So as I said, we have these lasting effects, and from additional regressions, we can learn that this lying in part 3 is not explained by the previous treatment, but rather by the previous behavior. Yeah, so if you just look at the treatment coefficients, you might think, oh yeah, the treatment is effective. But once you control for whether a player 1 has lied before, this is actually driving his or her behavior. So if they had been liars in part 2, they are going to be liars in part 3, the higher probability, and it's not really about the treatments they were in. So it's like the treatment effect is going through this having tried to lie or not, and having experienced a successful lie or not. On the victim side, we don't see any lasting effects on the sanctioning regimes on trust. The treatment differences are, again, not significant here. We can just see that again in regressions. It's actually, if you have been matched to a player 1 who lied to you in the past, your trust is just significantly decreased in the future. Okay, so to conclude, what have we seen in this experiment? Fine seems to be most effective in deterring wrongdoing, in particular if we consider part 2 with this repeated decision-making. Having been checked or having been caught lying has no additional effects on the infringers. And in part 3, we observed that there are seemingly lasting effects of both sanctioning schemes. We don't know when they wash out, but at least for a short period of time, it looks like the perpetrators learned from the sanctioning schemes. So what can we tell legislators? So what can they learn from this experiment? They should use fine sanctions more often. It seems to have the stronger deterrence effect. And there seem to be these hidden costs of compensation schemes. In the first place, it looks like, oh, it's nice to compensate the victim. But on the other hand, we find that the fine treatment is much better in deterring wrongdoing in the first place. So this is something legislators should take into account when deciding what type of sanction scheme to implement. Effects on the potential victims, we observe that they actually have the highest levels of trust in the fine treatment compared to the no sanction treatment. And then this effect is driven by the fact that in the fine treatment, player 2s just meet fewer liars, so they can just trust better. And what we found interesting is that if we compare the fine treatment and the compensation treatment and the earnings our player twos make in these, we find that they are actually quite comparable. So even if you do not get a compensation in the fine treatment, your earnings are still as high as in the compensation treatment. And both earnings from both sanction treatments are higher than the no sanction treatment. Yeah, so that means we don't find in part 3, we found no lasting effects of the fine and compensation treatment. So we could say that installing trust in potential victims is really difficult. Player 2 seemed to be rather pessimistic about player 1s in our experiment. And the treatment differences are not driven by their beliefs about player 1's behavior, but rather about the experiences they made with these player 2s under the different sanctioning schemes. So it really takes time to install trust in a society. And the potential victims, they need some time. They need to get a chance to gather experience with a newly implemented sanctioning scheme. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, if I can ask a quick one. Thanks, Leonie. It's really interesting, nice. It almost seems like from all of your results together, that it's almost like there are types of people, those who will lie and who won't, regardless of almost the policy. Of course, the fine or the compensation maybe reduces lying a bit, but do you think that's the case? Can we derive such a result from your experience?
Maybe. I mean, the fine treatment in particular was able to deter some people from lying. So in no sanction, we saw actually more people would like to lie if they are not fined for doing so. So I think, the law can help to make people behave better in a way. But there's still, I mean, not sure if it's an experimental artifact or if that's true for the entire society. It might depend on the probability with which we caught the liars and sanctioned them. This is one thing we want to focus on in the future then, to see if this probability to be caught, which is only 33% or 1/3 of players were checked in our experiment. If we increase that number, if that will deter the perpetrators, potential perpetrators even more. And this has been shown in other experiments as well. But it's still interesting to see if there are differences in the compensation and the fine scheme treatment then.
Thank you.
I will just have a quick note. Sorry, Zahra. Actually, I was going to propose that increasing probability or increasing the fines, because if you look at from expected payoff perspective, you lose 10 with 33 probability, but you gain 10 for sure, right? So if you expected payoff maximizer, you will lie. And that is why that fines or compensations again leave some people still lying. And actually, that would, I guess, lead to interesting results. And also this difference between compensation and fine is also interesting, because maybe, probably it is the case, when you compensate the losses, the people may feel more okay about lying. Okay, if I get caught, I will give that money to the one who I hurt. And then, okay, I am more okay with lying. And actually, that is interesting, that one may not directly expect to see. That was all. That was what I wanted to note. So good work and good presentation.
Yeah, I had the same comment as Şahin. Like in compensation, I would expect that if people care about others, they would be more okay for lying, because the money will go to the others. So I don't know if you had some kind of social preference variable, in your experiment, you could check whether people who care about others are less deterred or more deterred. And,
yeah, I have to check that. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
And last thing, you said when you remove the sanctions, then there is still some effect of fine and compensation online behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, do you explain in the paper what could be the mechanism behind it? You said spillover, but isn't it more about norms, that it actually changed the norms?
Yeah. So it's a spillover of norms. So like we implemented a norm of not lying and wanted to see if that survives even if the sanction scheme is removed. And at least for one period, we observe only one period. And in that we still see, they adhere to a new norm apparently. But yeah, again, we don't know if that washes out in the future at some point.
Any other questions? If not, we will draw the session to conclusion. Thank you all presenters for amazing talks, really interesting. Good luck with the publications. And thank you for the organizers of the conference as well for giving us the opportunity to present our work. Thank you. So
Thank you.
have good Sundays, and I will talk to you separately later on.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.